electricity safely and inexpensively with nuclear power, but they couldn't. So the bottom line is that was the nexus, the connection that existed that generated this interesting alliance between the United States Jesuit headquarters on the one hand and the National Organization for Women on the other hand, where Sarah and the people in now were attempting to dig in and find out who had murdered this young female labor activist out in Oklahoma. And so that's how we got started. And when we ended up winning the $10.5 million judgment against the Kerr-McGee Nuclear Corporation, the largest civil judgment in the entire history of the United States at that point in time, and shutting down the Kerr-McGee Nuclear Power Processing Plant. The Kerr-McGee facility was not just a nuclear power plant. It was instead a reprocessing plant that was attempting to gather all of the waste material from the 103 private nuclear power stations around the country, the expended material, and reprocess it so they could make more and more nuclear waste material, more and more material for the power corporations. But what they were doing is they were smuggling 98% pure bomb-grade plutonium out of the facility to bring to Israel to create nuclear weapons, and Iran at the same time. That's what we discovered. That's what Karen Silkwood had walked on the top of, and that's why they murdered her, because she was on her way to deliver the internal documents from the Kerr-McGee Corporation that would reveal to the New York Times that David Burnham was waiting for her at the hotel. So they ran her off the road and killed her and took her documents away. That was how it started with us, with the Christic Institute, with Sarah and ourselves, the National Organization for Women in the Jesuit office. And so when we got done with that case, everybody said, please don't stop. Don't disband the organization that you've put together that has gotten to the bottom of the Silkwood case and has stopped the private nuclear power industry from expanding any farther. And so we continue to do additional cases, some of which Sarah has pointed out. The Greensboro case, the Carthan case, we did the 3 Mile Island case. We're the ones that did the 3 Mile Island litigation that stopped them from pumping the waste materials from the radioactive core into the Susquehanna River. You know, we did one case after another. And so we were extraordinarily busy. We were taken up in doing a lot of these cases that you've all heard about now. But at the same time, what I was, when I was at Jesuit headquarters, what happened is that all of a sudden I got contacted right after President Carter won the election in 1976. On November 4th of 1976, President Carter gets elected, and the first thing that he did was he sent to have the CIA director sent down to Plains, Georgia, to his home, before he'd even left to go into Washington, D.C., and demanded that the CIA director come and brief him on the UFO issue. And what his connection was to the extraterrestrial civilization, if there was one. Turns out the CIA director at that time was George H.W. Bush, who had been appointed by Gerald Ford, who had taken over after the resignation of Richard Nixon. Okay, this was the nature of those particular times where things were in kind of upheaval. But that when President-elect Carter ordered the CIA director to come down and brief him on the UFO issue, George Bush Sr. refused to brief him, saying that as President of the United States, he had no need to know that information. And President Carter, rather than take on the entire Central Intelligence Agency and spend valuable political capital that he had gained in the election, what he did instead is he contacted Congress, and he told Congress that he was being denied the information, and he asked Congress to contact the Congressional Research Service and to have the Congressional Research Service do a major investigation and research project to ascertain what kind of documentation we had within the United States government records to show what information we had about UFOs and any extraterrestrial civilization that may have been responsible for them. That's when I got contacted. I got contacted by Dr. Marcia Smith, who was the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service. She contacted me and asked if I would become special counsel to the investigation. Specifically, she wanted to know if I could get in contact with the Vatican through the Jesuit order in the Catholic Church to find out what the Vatican had in there about UFOs and the extraterrestrial civilization. So I became general counsel, special counsel to that investigation, and in that context, I actually secured access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book. Now, Project Blue Book was an investigation that was conducted between 1952 and 1967 by the United States Air Force. People can come on in up here if you want. Keep on coming in. There's some more room up here, and you can sit along the aisles where you're not blocking people coming in and out. Okay, so the bottom line is that when I got to see the classified portions of Project Blue Book, I saw photographs of an actual UFO crash retrieval undertaking going on. So I knew that this was real, and I traced out copies of the crash saucer and the symbols that were on the saucer, brought them back to Jesuit headquarters, provided them to Father William Davis, who was my superior at Jesuit headquarters at the time, and he ended up taking a photograph out of his desk and showing it to me of another UFO, which he had actually gotten from his brother-in-law, who was in fact the chief air traffic controller at the Seattle airport. Okay, and so that we were off and running and looking into this UFO issue, and I ended up with Father Davis going to all 54 of the top religious denominations in the country and proposing that they set up a task force to actually look into what the theological and philosophical implications were for our encounter with an extraterrestrial civilization. Well, it turns out that I was asked by Dr. Marcia Smith to brief the top 50 scientists at SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory up in Pasadena. And so I went there and briefed them on the theological implications of this. And I began to dig in and do research at the Jesuit headquarters about this particular issue. It was later on that I was then contacted by Dr. John Mack. Dr. John Mack was the head of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And it turns out that a policy had been adopted by the United States Defense Department and the Central Intelligence Agency. And that is if any government officer, military officer, or anyone else attempted to file an official notice of an encounter with a UFO, that the first thing that was done is they were ordered to go get a psychiatric exam. This was a mechanism that they had designed because they were asserting that if you're going to be making an extraordinary claim like this, one of the first things we have to do to help you, of course, is to prove that you're not crazy. But of course, this was not a career builder to have in your record. Okay? And so, but John Mack happened to be the chairman of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, so he is the one to whom they sent a number of these officers. Now, after a handful of these officers and his having interviewed them and gotten into great detail, doing an evaluation of their psychological stability, etc., he became convinced that they were within normal parameters of being normal people, and yet they were making these extraordinary claims about having encountered not only the UFO vehicles, but actually in some instances having encountered beings that were piloting these craft that were non-human. So John went actually and started inquiring deeper into this and got to meet more and more people who were having these kind of experiences. And he ended up interviewing over 100 people whom he vetted to figure out the core handful of these people that he thought were beyond any dispute at all that had this experience. And then he wrote a paper. He wrote a scientific paper for the New England Journal of Medicine, the premier medical journal, to have their records peer-reviewed. So he wrote the article, submitted it to the New England Journal of Medicine, and within a short period of time, they sent the article back to him and said they weren't going to publish it. So he said, this is troublesome. What I'll do is I'll dig in, I'll do more footnotes, I'll do a little deeper research on it, make it more scientific, then I'll send it back to the New England Journal of Medicine, which he did. Within 2 days, the executive secretary for the publisher, the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, is standing in John's office with the envelope unopened and said, you know, I've been instructed by the editor-in-chief of this, Relman, Dr. Relman, to come back and give you the envelope and point out to you that it has not been opened. Because we're not only going to not publish this, we're not even going to read it. Okay? And John got so upset about this that he contacted a publisher because he had already won the Pulitzer Prize for writing the definitive psychobiography of T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. He therefore contacted a publisher and got the paper published, and it came out. And the publishers named the book Abductions, Contact with Extraterrestrial Aliens. Okay? So the bottom line is he got dragged up in front of a faculty committee that were actually threatening to revoke his tenure for failure to follow responsible research guidelines. You know, it was just a sham. They were just embarrassed that he was, in fact, he ended up going on Oprah Winfrey and her shows talking about this extraordinary experience that these people were having. So when they dragged him up in front of this tribunal, all of a sudden, the dean of the medical school came to see John and said, John, I noticed that your book is out now, and you know, I'd like to kind of have you come in and talk with some of us on the faculty about the book. It's kind of really interesting. John shows up for the meeting, and it turns out that they're arrayed in this tribunal, you know, with Dr. Relman, the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, chairing the tribunal, along with the president, the dean of the medical school, and legal counsel for Harvard University, and a handful of faculty people. And they were all there, and they started excoriating him for what he had done and how he was embarrassing Harvard University for daring to suggest that somehow these people were having a real encounter with extraterrestrial beings. So John ended up contacting his best friend, Ron Robertson, who was the head of the the art department down in Santa Barbara, at Santa Barbara City College. And he called me and asked me if I would be willing to accept a telephone call from his best friend, John Mack, and consider representing him, which I did. And John flew me back to Cambridge. I went in front of the tribunal. When I confronted the tribunal, I said, look, it's not clear what the nature of this tribunal is. This is not an AAUP, you know, Association of University Professors convened tribunal. You know, it's clear it's not, but I don't know what it is you're trying to do here. And so what they said is, and here's Relman, you know, who'd rejected his article, sitting as the chair, says, well, you know, what happened here is that when Dr. Mack published this book, the dean, Tolson, of the medical school, sitting here on my right, started receiving a lot of phone calls and asking him lots of questions about the book. And he found himself unable to answer those questions, so he thought he would just have Dr. Mack invited in to have a conversation with him about this. And as long as he was doing it, he thought he'd have a few other faculty members happen to be coming in. Now here they are sitting as a tribunal, right? And I said, well, okay, excuse me. I said, then look, in the spirit of cooperation on this, in order to try to help you, can you tell me, you know, who is it that called? All of a sudden, there was this complete dead silence fell over the whole room, and they all started looking at each other like this. And finally, the legal counsel shook her head no, like that. And Roman says, no, I'm sorry, we're not at liberty to discuss that. So I said, well, then, okay, if the whole point of this is trying to figure out how to assist Tolson in getting answers, you know, can you tell me, what were the questions that they asked? Another big, long, dead silence falls over the room. They said, no, I'm sorry, we're not at liberty to discuss that either. And so I said, well, then look, let me ask this. All of this is in the spirit of cooperation with you, but can you tell me, is it, whatever the nature of this hearing process is, can you tell me whether either one or both of the following fact questions are going to be at issue? Number one, whether an extraterrestrial civilization exists. And secondly, whether or not at least some of these UFO vehicles might actually be a craft coming from an extraterrestrial civilization. And Dr. Relman said, well, absolutely those two questions are going to be at issue, and it's completely ridiculous to think that either one of those things is true. Now, this is Harvard University in 1994, just asserting that it's absolutely ridiculous to think that there's actually life elsewhere in the universe, and that any one of the UFOs might actually be a vehicle from such a location. So I said to him, oh, well, good, then I think I should tell you in the spirit of fairness here, is that John Mack and I just spent the weekend with Lawrence Rockefeller, and Lawrence Rockefeller has agreed to finance a grand rounds here at Harvard University on the issue of UFOs. And we will bring in, military officers, we'll bring in investigators from the Federal Aviation Agency, we'll bring in police officers, we'll bring in teachers from around the country, we'll bring in experts, and the legal counsel for Harvard University leaps to her feet and she says, absolutely not. We're not going to have this procedure turned into some kind of a circus. And so I proceeded to go out and start to interview under the auspices of Dr. John Mack, the head of the clinical psychiatry department at Harvard University. I began to go around with a letter of introduction from him to meet with people who could be witnesses to Harvard University. That was the context in which I got to meet virtually every one of the major researchers on the UFO issue in the world. And when we ended up winning, and Harvard University backed off and said, no, we aren't going to go through this whole process. What they're going to give up. What John did is John organized a thing called the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research, the peer group there in Cambridge in Massachusetts. And that numbers of people came together who had had experiences like this. Part of my job was to vet these people, to interview them, to determine the credibility of these people, etc. And subsequent to that, I was contacted by Dr. Stephen Greer to become legal counsel for the Disclosure Project for 20 years. And I was then contacted by Stephen Bassett to become legal counsel for the citizens' hearings on disclosure. Excuse me. And more recently, I've been contacted by Lou Elizondo, whom you just saw here. Lou Elizondo turns out to be was the director of the top secret program inside the Pentagon, investigating the UFO phenomenon. Okay, and that's how I got to meet the more current people involved, all the people deep into the national security state, excuse me, who are knowledgeable about all this. What I want to do in the time that I have remaining, there will be a Q&A session following a brief presentation more that Sarah's going to make. But the bottom line is, what I want to do is I want to share with you some of the explicit facts that we now know about the UFO phenomenon in this ET phenomenon. Okay, number one, it turns out that, much to no one's surprise here, that there are in fact other planets. It turns out that until like 20 years ago, the entire scientific community refused to acknowledge that there were any other planets in the universe outside of our solar system. Why is that? Because they couldn't see them. And they said, well, if you can't see it and weigh it and touch it and smell it, then it functionally doesn't exist. And so until we do know that they're going to just pretend they're not there. And so they actually took the position that as far as science was concerned, the planets inside our solar system were the only planets. And then they said, well, of course they don't have any life, or else we'd know it. All right? So the bottom line is, it turns out that lo and behold, there are other planets. We now know, not only from the Hubble, but from the James Webb telescope, there are tens of thousands of millions of billions of other planets. It turns out that virtually every one of the 500 billion star systems just inside our own galaxy, that virtually every single one of the stars has planets. And over 20 or 25% of them, they estimate, have planets that are in the so-called Goldilocks zone, which is where it's not too hot and it's not too cold, like the porridge in Goldilocks. And therefore, they are rock solid planets. They're not just gaseous planets, so that they can actually generate and potentially sustain life. So we know that to be true now. Okay, so we start out with that premise. Now, number two, it turns out that we know that there are at least, thank you, there are at least 5 of the highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human species who are in fact coming and going from our planet. That's of course the big one. That's the one that they don't want to acknowledge now. And it turns out that there have been consistent and regular sightings of them, and radar readings of them, photographs being taken of them, etc., ever since mid-1945. And why in mid-1945? It was because they started gathering these UFOs around the Trinity site, where we detonated the first atomic bomb. This is before the actual dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A Colonel Philip Corso, who was just a captain at that time, had a direct physical sighting and encounter with a UFO that landed on the ground at Trinity site in July of 1945. I'll put this somewhere here, but the bottom line is that, now the question is, how do we know that? How do we know that happened? Well, primarily because I have seen the 8mm black and white home movie that he produced of himself telling his grandchildren after he was dead about what happened. He wasn't going to go to his grave without revealing to his grandchildren what had happened at that point, about how he had been, he'd gone off to have lunch. He'd gone off into the hills away from Yucca Flats, where we were doing the preparing of the Trinity site, where they were going to detonate the first atomic bomb in a place called Alamogordo, which translates, not ironically, as the valley on the journey to death. That's where we were doing the experiment. Okay, and that he ended up going out for lunch to go up the hills, took a Jeep and went up in the hills, and there was a UFO sitting on the ground. And they had somehow run into all the high intense radar around the facility, around White Sands, where they were going to do the detonation, and it had somehow caused them to have to force land. And so he encountered them, and he actually saw the beings get off the craft and communicate to him telepathically, pleading with him if he could possibly exercise some kind of authority to go and turn off whatever this is that was happening here with all this radar, to allow them to escape. And he actually did it. He actually went back and said, look, let's test the radar system, let's turn it off for a minute or two. And he did, and they fled. Okay, that was back in July of 1945. Now, very importantly, I would assume that virtually everybody in the room here, including some of the younger folks, have heard about Roswell, New Mexico. This is in July 8th of 1947. This is 2 years later when a vehicle crashed there at Roswell outside of the 509th Bomber Group. And why were they there? The 509th was the only place in the world that had nuclear weapons at that point. This is the home base of the Enola Gay that dropped the 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this is where they had the remaining nuclear bombs, atomic bombs at that point, by 1947. and this is the place where the crash occurred. Now, the United States Air Force has lied profoundly about this incident, but the reality is that how do we know that it happened there? Other than our having talked to, almost 100 people who were there, who saw the bodies, who helped recover the debris, etc., who helped manufacture the fake case and pretending that it was weather balloons. But the most definitive of them is, the fact is that when they tried to pretend that it was a weather balloon that crashed, General Ramey, who was the commander of the 8th Air Force, U.S. Army Air Force group, ordered the local newspaper to send a photographer in the middle of the night after they'd issued a public press statement that they'd recovered a UFO. He wanted to scotch that story. So what he did is he ordered them to send their photographer in at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they've got this famous, now infamous, photograph of General Ramey kneeling on the ground next to this weather balloon debris. And it turns out that he held in his hand a telegram that he had in his hand. He had this cable in his hand. And as soon as I saw the photograph one time, I said, someday we may have the technology to be able to blow up that photograph. It turns out that in 1994, when I was at the International UFO Congress in Laughlin, Nevada, I was delivering an update on the John Mack case, and a young man came up out of the audience and asked to see me, and it turns out he had found the photographer who actually took that photograph in Roswell on the night of July 9th of 1947. And he said, so I said, look, go and confirm that that's the guy. If it is, see if he possibly had kept a copy of the negatives of that. And I said, if he did, we can put together the financing, we can organize this, and we can get those digitized and blown up, which we have done. And what it says on the cable, you can read the cable, where it says, take the disc to right field and bring the bodies of the victims. That's not a weather balloon. And so we now have that definitive written proof of the lies that they've told about this. And it turns out that what had happened is immediately after the Roswell crash in July of 1947, then President Truman convened a special secret group of people that he put together outside of the constitutional frameworks of our government. Did not notify Congress about it, did not notify the State Department about it, did not notify the official Defense Department. What he did instead is he set up a private group, a little trust of a special kind, to coordinate keeping this secret. And he called it the Majestic Group. And there were 12 people in this, and it's now become known as Majestic 12, MJ12. That's the group that was originally put together. And what we've discovered now, because I was contacted by Lou Elizondo, as you've seen here, who was the director of the top secret program inside the Pentagon on the whole UFO issue. I've met with and talked with people who have made it very perfectly clear now that we know that particular group, that Majestic MJ12 group, has been engaged in a criminal process for now the last 77 years, where they've been criminally suppressing this information and hiding the information and threatening and intimidating people. They're threatening to kill people if they talked about it. And we're not talking just about the government people inside who have taken security oaths to conceal the information. We're talking about American citizens who happen to come into contact with a UFO. And they're threatened by this group, and they're threatened to actually be killed, them and their families, if they talk. This is the lengths to which they were going to keep this secret. Now, the question you ask is, why would they want to keep it secret? Why wouldn't they tell the world about this extraordinary discovery that there was an extraterrestrial civilization and that they had actually figured out superluminal flight, and that they had alternative sources of energy that we might be able to have access to? The answer to that is that the people at the highest levels of the executive branch, they wanted to keep the secret so they could develop the technology as a weapon. They wanted to be able to have the superluminal flight secrecy so they could design aircraft that could fly faster and at higher maneuverability than any of their opponents. They wanted to have the alternative source of energy so that they could keep it for themselves for providing energy to their weapon systems. Excuse me. And the bottom line is they began this process during the period of the Cold War, and they just carried it on. And they carried it on, and it got deeper and darker. They went to greater and greater lengths to punish people to keep the secret. And they then passed it on. They have progeny to the MJ-12 group. When a person got too old and retired or died, they would replace them with someone else. Thank you, Chris. And what we've discovered is that not only did they establish a super secret crash retrieval program where they had a whole unit set up to go anywhere in the world at a moment's notice to recover any crashed UFO, but in fact they began a program to violently bring down UFOs, to actually engage them and try to knock them out of the sky so they could capture their technology rather than have to recover it in a crash debris. Wow. All right, and so they started doing this, and what's happened is they've developed an entire criminal enterprise around this entire thing, and they've reached out to private aerospace corporations like Lockheed Martin, like Grumman. What they've done is they have put some of this technology into their hands to offer them the option of being able to get some patents on derivative technology from these, but they would keep the major technology secret and give it over to the government so our government could use it to design weapon systems. That's what we've discovered. So that this is sort of the bottom line prosaic message that I wanted to give to you. But the question that arises is, what are we going to do about this? And what is anybody doing about it right now? Why is it that this has come up more recently? Because people have heard about this issue for some time now. It's been bubbling around, and there are 1,000 books on it, 100 books on Roswell. But the bottom line is that what's happened is all of a sudden, back in 2017, the New York Times comes up with a front page New York Times story revealing the existence of this above top secret program going on inside the Pentagon, while the United States Defense Department is openly lying to everybody, lying not only to people in the United States, but lying to Congress, actually under oath, asserting to Congress falsely that there is no such program, they don't know what you're talking about. And they were maintaining, as you recall, that UFOs weren't even real, that UFOs aren't real. They're flocks of birds that you're misidentifying, that they're searchlights, shining off the bottom of cloud formations, and you're thinking that they're craft, and they come up with all of these ridiculous arguments. But the fact of the matter is, up until after the publication of the revelation of this a secret group doing the studying of it inside the Pentagon, the official position of the Defense Department is the UFOs aren't even real. And anybody who thinks that they're real is mentally ill, and that they ought to have their head examined, and they definitely should be not given a security clearance, and they shouldn't be hired by any government agency, and they shouldn't be hired by any private corporation either. They were engaged in this very aggressive program of suppressing anybody that tried to assert the reality of the UFO phenomenon. But at the same time, of course, we have all these stories going on about tens of thousands of people reporting that a UFO came down over their farmhouse, and that it landed in their field, and that they were abducted and carried over into the craft. And what we've discovered is what's been going on here. What's been going on is that there are 5 of these species. There's what they call the short grays, There are the tall grays, which are sometimes called the tall whites. There are the reptilians, and there's this insectoid species that they call the mantis people, because they look like praying mantises. They're like almost 7 feet tall, extraordinarily skinny, who always appear to be in charge. The mantis people, whenever they appear with other species, always seem to be the ones giving directions to them. Okay, and then there's this other one, it's a very problematic one, about allegedly from the Pleiades, of a species that looks virtually identical to us. That's very problematic. That's very problematic, because the minute you broach that particular subject, you start getting into this whole discussion about, are we related to them? Are they us in the future? You know, are we of the same genetic source than they? You know, you get the movie Prometheus, etc. Bottom line is, however, there are these other 4 species that are absolutely not human. That's for sure. Okay, and that number one, and what's happening is that these species are engaged in abducting human beings, and a number of the women who have been abducted have their egg cells involuntarily removed, and their 24 chromosome egg cells are in fact genetically spliced together with 24 chromosomes of the DNA from the extraterrestrial species, and is put together into a 48 chromosome zygote, which is implanted in the uterus of the woman, and then she, after the abduction experience, suddenly discovers herself being pregnant, even though some of them haven't been with a man for over a year. And all of a sudden they're totally baffled at how this conceivably happened. And then the bottom line is after the first trimester, they carry the child to the end of the first trimester, and all of a sudden they're abducted again. And they come back from the second abduction, and they're not pregnant anymore. And there's all kinds of medical records proving that this is happening. And that it's now become evident that there is, in fact, a conscious program going on, pursuant to which at least 4 of these species are engaged in a collective, cooperative process, by means of which there are hybrid children being generated. All right? This is true. Okay? It is true. And the reality is that this element inside the United States government knows that this is true. And they're lying. They're lying to us, they're lying to Congress, and we have effectively now persuaded major members of the United States Senate that this is happening. We have put together some 40 whistleblowers who have come and testified under oath to the United States Senate Intelligence Committee, who have provided evidence that we are in possession of non-human origin extraterrestrial spacecraft, and that there's a conscious back engineering program going on, trying to back engineer these to develop weapons without the knowledge of Congress, without any oversight of Congress, and in complete defiance of Congress, in fact. So we've got a situation that is very similar to what happened in Iran-Contra, where you have the Congress being lied to by a deep covert operation inside the executive agency, thinking that they can get away with this. And so that we ended up being called by Luis Elizondo, who's the head of the project inside the Pentagon, who has decided that he's had enough of this, that we need to reveal this to the people. We've convinced a number of the senators. We've gotten the United States Senate to pass a 64-page law to set up a 9-person panel to order all 6 of the United States military services, all 18 of the United States intelligence agencies, all 32 of the United States Defense Department agencies, ordered them to compile every single piece of information they've got about the UFO phenomenon, and that they've ever had possession of since January 1st of 1945, to collect it all together and to make it available to the National Archives in the classified sections by October 20th of next month. Okay? Now, on the Senate side, we got them to order them to turn it over immediately on October 20th. And it went over to the House side to get approval. The House amended the language to say that they had to gather it all together and have it prepared in a digitized format where it can be searched and have an index which is searchable, and to have it prepared to be turned over to the National Archives by October 20th of 2024, and then turn it over as soon as possible. Now, as lawyers, you read language like that and you know crabbing language right away. It's just crabbing sideways. So what we've done is our institute, the Romero Institute, has instituted a new paradigm project, the New Paradigm Institute, which you'll find out about. You can click on, well, you just go to our site, newparadigminstitute.org, right? And you click onto this little gizmo here, and it'll give you all the there's more technical terms for it. Anyway, the bottom line is it'll start feeding you all kinds of information that we've put together now about this, because that we are not going to depend upon Congress to be the ones that are going to reveal all of this. You know, and what we've discovered now, I want to get before I have to step back here to let Sarah talk for a minute. Look at, bottom line is this. Bottom line is this. We are in the process of forcing disclosure, to force it upon the United States government that doesn't want to do this. And we have allies inside the United States national security state infrastructure because they're really worried. They're really worried because here's where if that hasn't been serious as a heart attack yet, let me tell you that the doomsday clock that has been prepared by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has just been reset because of the stuff in the Ukraine. It's been set now to 90 seconds before midnight. And a 24-hour clock is now moved all the way up to 90 seconds before midnight. This is the shortest fuse on the atomic clock that's existed in its entire history since 1947, when they created this doomsday clock. All right, and the fact is that the United States government has been responsible for moving into place major U.S. missiles, nuclear missiles, along the western boundary of the Soviet Union, or Russia now. And Russia, in response to this, has now Putin has ordered the training of his field commanders on the deployment and utilization of tactical nuclear weapons now, in order for them to retain control over the western sections of the Ukraine that they've accomplished so far. Most importantly, of course, Crimea, which is their access to the only warm water port in all of Russia, where their submarines come and go. Okay, so they aren't going to give this up, and they're willing to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in order to protect this. And so the problem is that the United States, there's a major that is being clothed in patriotism and support of liberty, and let's all help Ukraine because they want to have freedom and sovereignty that, like anybody wants to have, from the tyranny of Russia. I mean, it's this whole major propaganda campaign that's going on right now, which is trying to rationalize what's going on here on the part of the United States and the NATO countries. And they're putting Putin into a corner, and Putin has got nuclear weapons, all right? And so that what's happening is there's a major anxiety building inside the Pentagon that we are approaching a point of potential no return. And what they're concerned about, in our judgment, is that the UFO species are considering intervention. because they have displayed the capacity to shut off all of our nuclear weapons. That we have with us here tonight, actually, you know, that the captain who was a lieutenant at the time was in the U.S. Minuteman missile silo up in Montana back in 1967. That when the UFO came over and shut off 10 separately wired United States missiles there, okay? So that the bottom line is that we know from direct first-hand witnesses that the UFO people have the potential capacity to shut off our nuclear weapons. And they now have demonstrated they have the capacity to shut off our entire nuclear aircraft carriers. That they have risen now from beneath the sea, and they've shut off an entire United States nuclear aircraft carrier battle group. Completely shut off all of their electricity, shut off all of their propulsion and forward momentum, all of their electronic systems, and leave them dead in the water. Okay. Now that the bottom line is that this is causing deep anxiety on the part of the people in the Pentagon, because they view that as a threat to our national security, which you can understand from their limited, narrow perspective. But the bottom line is that what's happening now is that there's